The hospital room was cold, lit by a pale glow that made everything too silent. Helena held her father's hand, watching the almost imperceptible rise and fall of his chest. The sound of the heart monitor marked the rhythm of the seconds, as if time were saying goodbye too. Outside, the rain beat against the glass with a soft, steady sound, as if the sky mourned along with her. In that moment, all that existed was his breathing and her fear. She remembered the days when her father still walked steadily down the hallway, giving orders and keeping the world in order. Now, he was just a frail body surrounded by machines and medicine. Helena stroked his gray hair, trying to believe his presence still meant something. "I'm here, Father," she whispered, as if the words could pierce the pain. The man, his eyes nearly closed, moved his lips, and a single word escaped. "I'm sorry." Helena wasn't sure if she'd imagined it. The word sounded faint, but charged with something that felt like guilt. Her heart raced and she leaned closer, trying to understand. But her father's gaze was already lost in the distance, as if he were seeing something beyond the room. The sound of the monitor grew longer, and the silence that followed was absolute. Helena stood there, motionless, until she realized that time had stopped. The tears came slowly, warm, streaming down her cold skin. She felt the weight of grief and the emptiness of an unexplained goodbye. The nurse came in, turned off the machines, and placed a hand on her shoulder, silent. Helena closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to hold on to the memory of who he had been, not the body that now lay before her. In that moment, she swore to herself that she would honor her father, that everything she had done, the years of denial, the silent love, would not be in vain. But deep down, something inside her already knew the words he left before he left would not leave her alone. On the way home, the cold wind bit her face. The world seemed the same, but it was irreversibly different. The hospital was behind her, and with it, the feeling that her love might still be reciprocated. Now all that remained was silence, and the word forgiveness echoing like a riddle. When she got home, everything looked the same, but the air had a new weight. The photos on the wall, the stacked books, the worn sofa, each thing held a story that now belonged only to her. She sat at the table and looked at the clock her father always repaired. The hand ticked away as if mocking her. She grabbed a notebook and began writing down her feelings, as she had since she was a little girl. "Today I lost my father, but he took something with him, something I don't understand." The ink blurred with tears. The morning began, and with it, the doubt. The phone rang. It was the family lawyer. His formal voice announced, "Mrs. Helena, the reading of the will be tomorrow at 10. She replied with a simple, "I'll be there," little imagining that this would be the true beginning of her story.
When she hung up, she glanced back at her father's portrait on the wall. His smile seemed genuine, but his eyes, she now realized, held secrets that had never been told. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever dedicated yourself so much to someone and, in the end, felt forgotten? So subscribe to the channel now, because here, every story is a mirror of real life. Click the subscribe button and come feel with me the weight and beauty of stories like this. The parish hall was full. The wreaths gave off a strong, almost suffocating scent. Helena stood motionless beside the casket, greeting people with a tired smile. Each embrace felt like a reminder of something she didn't want to feel. He was a good man, they said, an exemplary father. The words hurt, not because of what they said, but because of what she knew she had never truly experienced. Livia arrived late, wearing an elegant black dress and sunglasses that hid her face. She hugged Helena quickly, as if fulfilling a duty. "You took good care of him," she said, but there was a coldness in her words. Helena responded with only a nod. The distance between them was a chasm that grief only made more evident. During Mass, Helena couldn't pay attention to the prayers. The priest spoke of forgiveness and redemption, and every word seemed directed at her. Memories came flooding back, the arguments, her father's silence, her wounded pride. The sound of the organ filled the room, but inside her there was only noise. After the ceremony, the lawyer approached discreetly. "Ladies, tomorrow at 10 at the office. It's important that you both be present." Livia simply nodded, emotionless. Helena felt a shiver. Something in his voice seemed charged with tension. As the guests dispersed, Helena walked to the coffin and touched the cold wood. "Why, Father?" she whispered, not waiting for an answer. Livia's distant gaze met hers for a brief moment. There was something there, a mixture of contempt and pity that Helena couldn't decipher. Donna Celia, the neighbor, approached silently and took her hand. "Not everything is as it seems, my daughter. Sometimes love comes disguised as silence." Helena tried to smile, but the comment sounded strange, almost like a warning. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, the sound of the shovel hitting the ground echoed like a blow. Each mound of earth seemed to bury not only her father's body, but also the certainty she had about life. Back home, Helena sat on the sofa, exhausted. The flowers she'd brought from a wake were already beginning to wilt. She watched the wall clock and counted the seconds, trying not to think. But the silence was deafening, and deep down, she knew the peace she'd hoped for would never come.
The next morning, the sun timidly filtered through the window. The clock read 9:45. Helen grabbed her bag and left. The walk to the lawyer's office seemed longer than ever, and, though she didn't know it yet, she was about to hear the words that would change everything. The lawyer's office smelled of polished wood and old papers. The ticking clock marked time with cruel precision. Helena sat in the brown leather armchair, her hands trembling in her lap. Livia entered shortly after, with the same air of superiority she always had, her heels echoing on the floor like a reminder of distance. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, slowly leafing through the documents. "Ladies," he began, "your father left a detailed will. It begins with words of gratitude and closes with clear instructions on the division of assets." Helena's heart raced. She leaned forward slightly, expecting to hear the acknowledgement of a life of sacrifice. The lawyer continued, reading in a neutral voice, too cold for what he was about to say. "To my daughter Livia, I leave the family home, the investments, and all valuable possessions. To my daughter Helena, I leave my watch wrist, a symbol of the time we shared." The room seemed to spin. For a moment, the sound faded. The watch, that old broken watch Dad never fixed. Was that what it meant? Broken time? Livia smiled discreetly, without looking at her. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone more provocative than empathetic. The lawyer tried to end the meeting quickly, but Helena remained motionless, trying to process. Her throat burned, but the tears wouldn't come. "Something's wrong," she murmured, her voice almost broken. "This can't be right. I've been with him the whole time." The lawyer looked away uncomfortably. "Your father was very clear, Mrs. Helena. There's no denying it." She picked up the watch that was on the table, cold, heavy, useless, and held it back like someone holding a wound. As she left the office, the city seemed different. People greeted her with condolences that now rang hollow. Every step was a reminder of the injustice. When she got home, she threw her watch on the table, and it broke in two. The metallic sound echoed through the room like a crack inside her. She sat on the floor, her face in her hands. The image of her father smiling in old photographs now seemed to mock her. Everything she had given,
Sleepless nights, youth, love had been exchanged for nothing. That night, her tears came silently, stifled, and amidst the pain, a certainty emerged. The will was hiding something. Before going to sleep, she opened her father's drawer. Among old papers and bills, she found an envelope sealed with red wax. The name on the front made her shiver. "To my true daughter." Her breath caught, her hands trembled, and for the first time, grief turned to suspicion.
Dawn brought a gray sky, as if the world shared Helena's unease. Sitting at the table, she stared at the envelope, still sealed. The handwritten name seemed hastily written, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's. There was something solemn about the yellowed paper, as if it contained a confession. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to rip it open. The other feared what she would find. She took a deep breath and broke the seal. Inside was a letter, written on old paper, the ink already faded. The first line spoke of love and regret. "My true daughter, what I tell you now may be too late, but the truth must survive my silence." Helena felt her body go cold. Each word felt like a blade cutting through the little piece she had left. The letter spoke of promises made, irreparable mistakes, and decisions made to protect the family name. There were no clear details, only veiled references to a child who shouldn't exist and a choice made out of fear. Her hands trembled and tears stained the paper. Her father spoke of forgiveness, the same word he uttered with his dying breath. Helena ran to the old office, searching for more. She rummaged through drawers, folders, and cabinets. The smell of dust and old wood enveloped her. At the bottom of a drawer, she found an old photo, her father, younger, embracing an unknown woman, and beside him, 2 small children. On the back, a dedication written in soft script, "To Eduardo, for keeping his promise." Helena's heart raced. Promise! She felt her breath catch. Childhood memories began to blur together. The hushed arguments, her mother's ever-distant gaze, the way her father treated Livia with concealed coldness, and suddenly, everything seemed to fall into place in a painfully unsettling way. That night, she took the letter to Donna Celia, the neighbor who had been her father's friend for decades. The woman, upon reading the envelope, paled. "Helena, where did you find this?" Her voice trembled. "Your father, he did what he thought was right, but right isn't always fair." Helena persisted, demanding explanations, but Celia simply shook her head, distressed. "Some secrets should stay buried, my daughter." Helena returned home with her head on fire. She couldn't sleep. She reread the letter dozens of times, trying to decipher what was missing. My true daughter. Was it her? Was it Livia? Or was there someone else? The clock, the very one he had inherited, was striking midnight, and when the hand passed 12, it returned on its own, as if pulled by an invisible mechanism. Helena held her breath. For a moment, the sound of the ticking mingled with the sound of the rain beating against the window, and in the reflection of the glass, she thought she saw her father, not as she remembered him, but as a shadow. She blinked, and the vision was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. The past, finally, was beginning to speak.
The wind blew the porch curtains when Helena decided to leave. Her father's envelope still pulsed in her mind, as if the words were alive, whispering for answers. She went to the house of Doña Celia, the neighbor who had known the family for decades. The house smelled of coffee and old memories. The old woman opened the door with teary eyes, as if she had been expecting this visit. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked, before Helena could even say anything. "The letter." Silence was answer enough. Helena nodded, and Celia invited her in. The wall clock ticked the same monotonous sound as the one in her father's house, as if time between the two houses had the same beat. Helena placed the envelope on the table. What did he mean by "my real daughter"? Celia looked away, running a hand through her white hair. Your father did what he believed was right. There were things he wanted to protect. Sometimes love comes disguised as wrong. The words were soft, but filled with fear. Protect from what, Celia? Helena insisted. From whom? The woman took a deep breath, her eyes welling up. I can't tell you everything, my daughter, but your father lived in torment. Guilt consumed him. What he did was out of fear of losing what he loved. Helena felt her stomach churn. And what did he love? The image the world had of him, Celia replied, in a barely audible whisper. The words echoed through the room like muffled thunder. Helena felt anger, a dull, contained anger that grew within her chest. He lied to everyone, even me. Celia held her hand, trembling. Not everything is a lie, Helena, but sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie. As she left, the sky was beginning to darken. The heavy clouds seemed to mirror the weight she carried. On the way, she passed the old church and heard the bell ring. The sound seemed like a warning, as if the past were calling. At home, she opened the letter again and reread every line. The words "true daughter" burned in her eyes like fire. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Livia was standing in the doorway, her gaze cold and curious. Going through Dad's things, Helena? How rude. Her heart raced. She tried to hide the letter, but Livia had already seen it. Her sister's smile was that of someone harboring a bigger secret. You shouldn't look for answers, little sister. Sometimes it's better not to know who you really are. The silence between them lasted a few seconds, heavy as lead. Helena clutched the letter in her hands, trying to maintain control. What do you mean by that, Livia? She asked, trying to sound firm. Her sister shrugged, as if speaking of something trivial. Nothing that concerns you, but perhaps you should accept what you are, the forgotten daughter, the perfect caregiver. That was your role, not that of heir.
Helena felt her face burn. I was with him every day while you were away. I did everything for him. Livia approached, her expensive perfume mingling with the musty smell of the old house. And he rewarded you with an old watch. Maybe that says more than you realize. The words cut deep. Helena tried to hold back her tears, but the pain came in the form of anger. You don't understand anything. He loved me, even if he didn't show it. Livia laughed bitterly. He did. Daddy only loved himself, and you, my dear, were just the mirror in which he saw his pure self. The silence that followed was crueler than any scream. Helena turned, trying to get away from her sister, but Livia delivered the final blow. You don't even know who you really are, do you? The world seemed to stop. Helena turned back, her face pale. What do you mean by that? Livia smiled sideways, but didn't answer. She simply grabbed her bag and left, letting the click of her heels echo down the hallway like a warning. Helena was left alone, her heart racing. He walked to the living room mirror and looked at himself. For the first time, he didn't recognize his own face. His features seemed distant, as if they belonged to someone else. He touched the glass with his fingertips and felt the reflection return his empty gaze. Who am I? He murmured, and the question echoed in the silence of the house. Later, she sat on the floor and spread out all the letters and photos she had found on the rug. The image of her father with the unknown woman called to her again. His gaze in the photo was different, tender, genuine. Helena wondered if this was the same man who had raised two daughters, or if he had been two himself. Night fell without her noticing. In the darkness, her father's clock started working on its own again, its ticking like a beating heart. Helena watched it, mesmerized. Each beat seemed to repeat her sister's words, "You don't even know who you are." She closed her eyes, and for the first time felt fear. Fear of discovering the truth. Fear of realizing that the love she'd carried her entire life might have been nothing more than a lie. The house was silent when Helena turned on the office light. The closed curtains kept out the stuffy air and the smell of forgotten things. Every piece of furniture seemed to observe her presence, as if the walls held memories that didn't want to be awakened. She returned to the drawer where she'd found the letter, and among the documents and receipts, a corner of colored paper caught her eye. It was a photograph. He held it carefully. In the image, a young man, his father, smiled beside a dark-haired woman with an intense gaze. In her arms, two small girls played, one with a blue bow in her hair. On the back, a dedication written in the same handwriting he knew so well, "To Eduardo, for keeping his promise." The ground seemed to disappear beneath Helena's feet. Her heart pounded, and the air rushed from her lungs. He studied the faces carefully. The woman had something familiar, the shape of her face perhaps, the same look Helena saw in the mirror. The children also awakened in her something deep, unsettling recognition.
Her hands trembled as she placed the photo on the table. "Promise," she repeated quietly, trying to make sense of the words. Her father had always been a man of rigid principles, incapable of admitting weakness. What had driven him to hide a photo like that? She picked up the phone and called Donna Celia. "I need to talk to you. Now." The voice on the other end hesitated but agreed. Within minutes, Helena was at her neighbor's house. The place seemed darker than before, and Celia's face was drawn. Helena showed the photo without saying anything. The woman brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes welling up. "I knew this would come out one day," she murmured. "This woman, her name was Teresa." The name rang out like a breath of cold wind. "Your father loved you, Helena, long before all this. But things got complicated, and promises were made." "Who are these children?" Helena asked, her voice trembling. Celia took a moment to answer. "One of them is Livia." The world spun. Helena felt the ground slip away. "And the other one?" she persisted. Celia lowered her gaze. "The other one wasn't supposed to exist." The words hung in the air, heavy with pain and guilt. Helena felt her entire body tremble. Wasn't it supposed to exist? Your father did what he thought was right to protect everyone, including you. Celia took her hand, but Helena recoiled. "Protect from what?" she asked, almost shouting. "From whom?" But Celia didn't answer. She just said, her voice breaking, "Look for the priest. He knows more than I can tell you." That night, Helena looked at the old portrait and wept. She wept for not knowing who she was, for loving a father who might never have been her own, for a love that now turned into a shadow. In the mirror, her face looked like someone else's, and perhaps it was. The next morning dawned misty, the sun filtering through heavy clouds. Helena walked to the church, her heart pounding. The bell rang at noon, echoing through the small town like a warning. As she entered, she was overcome by the smell of incense and old wood. Father Augusto was kneeling before the altar, murmuring prayers. When he saw her, he rose slowly, as if already knowing the reason for her visit. "Father, I need answers," she said, her voice firm but her eyes pleading. He watched her for a moment, then gestured to the nearest bench. "Not all answers bring peace, my daughter." Helena clutched the envelope she carried, the letter, the photo, the evidence. Was he really my father? The priest took a deep breath, looking away at the stained glass window that reflected colored light onto the floor. Eduardo was a good man, but also weak in the face of his own sins. Helena felt her chest burn. He lied to me, didn't he? He loved you, Helena. I can guarantee that.
Tears fell without her realizing it. And Teresa and Livia? The priest pressed his lips together. Teresa was the greatest love and the biggest mistake of his life. When she became pregnant, the scandal would have destroyed everything. His name, his family, his respect. He made a deal, and he paid a high price for it. Helena trembled. What agreement? One involving 2 children and an exchange that should never have happened. The words came slowly, heavy with guilt. But the rest, daughter, belongs only to God. She stood up, stunned. No, I deserve to know! The voice echoed through the empty church. The priest didn't respond. He just made the sign of the cross and whispered, "Sometimes the truth is too heavy a cross to bear." Helena hurried out, her tears mixing with the wind. The sound of the bells sounded distant, almost ominous. She walked aimlessly through the streets until she reached her house again. In the living room, the photo still sat on the table, now illuminated by the afternoon light. She knelt and stared into her father's face. Anger and love mingled in an impossible whirlwind. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What have you hidden from me?" The clock struck again, its ticking echoing loudly in sync with her heartbeat. And in that hypnotic sound, Helena heard, or imagined she heard, a distant male voice whispering, "Sorry." She looked up, her eyes watering and her breath quickening. The past was alive, and now it would no longer be silent. The dawn was dense, and the wind rattled the windows. Helena woke with a start, her heart racing as if something were calling her from downstairs. She descended the stairs in silence, guided only by the pale moonlight filtering through the cracks in the window. As she passed the study, she felt the urge to open the cabinet where her father kept his oldest papers. There was a small mark on the floor, the outline of something that looked like a trap door. Curious, she pulled back the rug and found a hidden wooden lid. Lifting, she found a small staircase leading to a narrow, dark space. The smell of dust and rust was strong. She grabbed a flashlight and cautiously descended. In the corner, an ancient safe, covered in cobwebs and dust, seemed to have been waiting for her for years. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely keep her hands steady. She tried to turn the padlock. Locked. She searched around, and on a shelf found a small box with old keys. She tried one, then another, until the metallic click echoed through the silence. The safe opened with a deep groan. Inside was a stack of documents, letters, and an envelope with her name on it.
Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first few lines were familiar. Her father's handwriting, firm and elegant. "Helena, if you are reading this, it is because the truth has found the path I feared. For years I lived with the weight of a broken promise. Livia is not my daughter by blood, but she became part of my life out of guilt and fear. You, Helena, are the daughter I should have protected, and instead I hid behind lies." Helena felt her legs give out. Tears blurred her vision as she read. "I promised Teresa I would care for her child, and to do so, I gave up my own truth. The town would never understand, so I exchanged lives, names, and stories. Forgive me. I did it to preserve what was left of the family honor." She dropped the letter.
Her breath came in short gasps, her chest burning. "He changed our lives," she murmured. The echo of her own voice seemed to mock her. At the bottom of the safe, another envelope. "Livia, only if necessary." The flashlight flickered, and fear crept up her spine. She hurriedly closed the safe and climbed the stairs, clutching the papers to her chest. The living room clock read 3 in the morning. Shadows danced on the walls, and for a moment she swore she heard footsteps coming from upstairs. He ran to his room and locked the door. He sat up in bed, panting, his heart pounding. Outside, the wind was whipping, but inside, something far more dangerous was stirring, the certainty that his sister wasn't who she said she was. Dawn arrived before Helena had slept. Papers were scattered across the floor, letters, documents, old photos. The truth was now indisputable. She was the legitimate daughter, and Livia, the impostor raised under the cloak of lies. But the question lingered. Why? Why had the father chosen to lie to both of them? As he tried to gather his thoughts, he heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of the house. He jumped to his feet. The door opened with a sharp click. Livia walked in, her eyes hard, her posture as if she already knew. "You shouldn't have gone through his things," she said sharply. "So, it's true?" Helena asked, her voice breaking. "You knew?" Livia smiled bitterly. "I knew enough to understand that Daddy was ashamed of you. He hid you from everything, including me." Helena stepped forward. "That's a lie. He used you to hide his own mistake. I was his daughter, and he denied me out of cowardice."
The silence was broken with a crack, the sound of a fire igniting. Livia held a lighter and a stack of papers. "This evidence means nothing. He's dead, Helena, and what's dead doesn't speak." "Don't do that," Helena shouted, rushing to stop her, but the fire was already licking the paper. The heat spread, the smell of smoke filling the air. The flames reflected in Livia's eyes as if she were burning her own past. Helena managed to snatch some documents from the fire, but most were lost. "You're crazy," she screamed, coughing into the smoke. Livia just smiled, her eyes watering. "Crazy? Maybe. But I lived believing I was his daughter. You want to take even that away from me?" "It wasn't your fault," Helena shouted, trying to extinguish the flames with a blanket. "We were both deceived." "I wasn't fooled. I just chose to believe." The fire slowly died out, leaving ash scattered across the ground. The two lay there, exhausted, sweaty, and trembling. Helena looked around. Half the evidence was gone, but what remained was enough to prove everything. She put the saved pages back in a box and looked at her sister. "It's over," he said firmly. Livia gave a sad smile. "Nothing's over, Helena. You just opened the door to a hell you can't even imagine." The door slammed behind her, and silence returned. Helena fell to her knees, staring at the still smoldering ashes. The smell of burnt paper seemed to seep into her soul. She picked up her father's broken watch and held it tightly. "You destroyed me, Father, but now I know who I am, and the rest I will discover." Outside, the wind blew hard, blowing a few ashes through the open window. And between the smell of smoke and the distant sound of the church bell, Helena felt, for a brief moment, that the past hadn't finished burning yet. Ash still covered part of the ground when Helena decided to leave. The cold wind blew on her face, carrying with it the smell of smoke and memories. She walked to the old registry office, where her father kept family business and records. The clerk, an elderly man with a slow voice, recognized her immediately. "Mr. Eduardo's daughter," he said, his tone respectful but curious. "What do you want?" Helena took a deep breath and rested her hands on the counter. "I need a birth certificate, old, from 32 years ago." He raised his eyebrows. "Name?" She hesitated for a moment and then replied, "Livia Nogueira de Almeida."
The man leafed through books, pulled out dusty boxes, and after a few minutes withdrew a yellowed folder. "Here it is," he murmured.
Helena reached out, her heart racing. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly faded. But there, clearly visible, was what she was looking for. Father, unknown. Mother, Teresa Vasconcelos. No Eduardo Almeida. No surname to justify the inheritance. The world seemed to spin. She leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. The clerk looked at her uneasily. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Helena simply nodded and left, the document pressed to her chest. She walked down the street like a ghost, the voices and the noise of traffic growing distant. The sun seemed stronger, crueler. Each step was a vivid reminder of how much her life had been built on lies. Back home, she placed the certificate on the table, and next to it, the will. 2 pieces of paper that said opposite things, 2 truths that could never coexist. "He knew," she murmured. "He lied to the end." The tears came silently, and Helena let them fall onto the paper, smearing the ink. Later, he looked for Donna Celia again. "It's here, the proof." The neighbor looked at the document sadly. "Now you understand, my daughter, why he carried so much guilt. He switched names. He made you the secret and Livia a facade." Helena clenched her fists. "What now? What do I do with this?" Celia sighed. "The truth is a blessing, but it is also a curse. Decide what you want to heal, the name or the heart." Helena looked out the window, the sky turning red with the setting sun. In the reflection of the glass, she saw 2 versions of herself, the rejected daughter and the heir to the lie. And for the first time, she understood that perhaps she could never be just one of them. The next day, the news spread like wildfire. Someone, perhaps Livia, perhaps one of the lawyers, had leaked the information. "Helena wants to annul the will. You're accusing her dead father of falsifying documents." The local newspaper headlines plastered her name with a mixture of derision and outrage. People began to look at her differently on the streets. Some whispered, others looked away. At the bakery, the baker who had previously greeted her with kindness now merely lowered his head. At the market, she heard someone say, "It's a disgrace, messing with your own father's name." Each word was an invisible blow. At home, the phone rang non-stop. Journalists, curious onlookers, lawyers, everyone wanted a piece of the story. She hung up and sat on the floor, exhausted. Her father's broken watch lay on the table, silent and motionless, as if it too had given up on time. That afternoon, a loud knock on the door made her get up. It was the family lawyer. His face was pale and tense. "Mrs. Helena, perhaps it's best to leave things as they are. Your father's name is untouchable in this city." "Untouchable? He lied, manipulated, destroyed lives, and everyone pretends he was a saint." "Sometimes certain truths are better left buried."
"That's what everyone says," she replied, bitterly. "But no one asks what happens to those who live on them." That night, the church was empty when she entered. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Father," she called, her voice trembling, "the city hates me, and I just wanted to know who I am." The priest approached, his gaze sad. "The path of truth is lonely, daughter, but silence is deadly." Helena wept silently, kneeling. The sound of the bell echoed outside, and she felt her heart calm, not with peace, but with conviction. When she stood, her gaze was steady. She knew what was coming, the public confrontation. Back home, she gathered the remaining evidence and put it in a folder. Her father's portrait on the wall seemed to be watching her with that same smile as always, serene, enigmatic. She stared at him for a long time and, in a firm voice, said, "You taught me loyalty, Dad, but you never taught me to lie. Now it's my turn to bury you." The wind blew, making the frame sway. The glass cracked at the corner like a wound. Helena turned out the lights, and for the first time, the silence in the house didn't feel like a prison, but like a pre-war battlefield. The lawyer's office was crowded. The air felt heavy, dense, as if time itself had decided to watch the scene. Helena entered with firm steps, but her heart pounded within her chest. Every glance toward her carried judgment, curiosity disguised as compassion. Livia was there, impeccable as always, sitting in the front row. Her gaze was cold, calculated, like that of someone who believes they've won before the game has even begun. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We are here to discuss the validity of the late Mr. Eduardo de Almeida's will." Helena placed the folder she was carrying on the table. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was firm. "Before anything else, everyone needs to hear the truth." He took out Livia's birth certificate, her father's letter, and the old photograph from the folder. "My father lied. He lived under a respected name, but he built that respect on pain and deceit. This woman," he pointed to the photo, "is Teresa Vasconcelos. She had 2 daughters, and one of them wasn't meant to be." A murmur ran through the room. The lawyer tried to intervene, but Helena continued, "Livia isn't his daughter. I am, and he erased me from his own story to save face." Livia stood up, furious. "You've lost your mind. You're making all this up out of envy." Helena handed the document to the lawyer. "Read it." His voice trembled as he read the certificate. When he finished, silence spread like a stain. Some of those present lowered their eyes. Others looked at Helena with surprise or fear. Livia took a step back. "Even if it were true, he raised me. He loved me like a daughter." Helena took a deep breath. "And I loved him as a father, even when he denied me, even when he made me believe that love was something that needed to be earned."
The tears finally came, silently. Everything he tried to hide is here now. The lies die today. Livia turned and hurried out, the doors slamming behind her. The lawyer gathered up the papers, his expression dejected. "Miss Helena, what do you want to do?" She looked at him, her eyes red but serene. "Nothing. I've done enough. I don't want what was his. I just want to be free of what he left me." She left the office under the silent gaze of everyone. Outside, the wind blew hard, stirring up leaves and dust. The sky seemed about to collapse, and for the first time, Helena walked without fear, even though her feet trod on ruins. The city was eerily quiet. The scandal had exploded like thunder, and now only its echo remained. Helena walked the streets, feeling the eyes flee as she passed. There were no more whispers, only distance. The truth, finally spoken, had cost dearly. Respect, reputation, peace. Back home, she found everything as she had left it. The ashes still on the floor, the broken clock on the table, the portrait of her father with its cracked glass. Time seemed suspended, as if the world awaited her next move. She walked over to the portrait and ran her fingers over its face. "You won, Dad, because even now, I still love you." The tears came slowly, no longer in despair, but in acceptance. She understood, finally, that the love she felt no longer needed answers. It was what remained, imperfect, wounded, but real.
In the garden, the wind swayed the wilted flowers. Helena went outside and sat on the bench where her father used to read the newspaper. The air smelled of wet earth, and the distant sound of church bells marked the end of the afternoon. He picked up the watch and examined the broken face. With a small movement, he reattached the loose hand. The watch began to tick again, slowly, hesitantly, but briskly. Maybe time can be fixed. Hours later, he found a letter left on his doorstep. The handwriting was familiar. From Livia. You won, but I was also his victim. Don't look for me. I need to relearn who I am, like you. Maybe one day we'll meet. Without lies, without a father. Helena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt a weight lift from her chest. She burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the words turn to ash. As the flames danced, she realized that the silence in the house was now different, no longer that of pain, but of freedom. The clock kept ticking. The wind came in through the open window. And in the soft echo of each tick-tock, Helena finally understood. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't a gesture. It's simply moving on. The morning dawned brightly, after days of rain. For the first time, the sun streamed softly through the windows, illuminating rooms that had previously seemed gloomy. Helena walked slowly down the hallway, touching the walls, feeling the chill of the old paint blend with the warmth of the light. The house no longer weighed heavily. It was just a memory.
On the living room floor, boxes piled high with books, portraits, and old clothes. She had decided to sell everything, not for revenge, but for freedom. Each object that departed carried with it a fragment of pain. Each empty room felt like a new breath. The silence was now calm, full of space to begin again. Elena sat at the table and opened the notebook she'd used to write in since she was a little girl. The pages were yellowed, but they still smelled of paper and hope. She picked up a pen and began to write. My father wasn't the hero I imagined, but he wasn't the villain I was told he was either. He was just human, like me, like everyone. Perhaps his legacy lies not in the positions he left behind, but in the truths that have finally come to light. The words flowed lightly, as if they had always been there, waiting for the right moment to appear. She smiled, for the first time in a long time. Outside, she heard the sound of the truck carrying the last boxes. She stood up, took one last look around, and took a deep breath. She picked up her father's watch, now working, and put it on his wrist. The hand marked the exact time the sun hit the broken portrait, making the glass reflect a golden glow. Elena approached the fireplace and placed the last remaining envelope, the will, inside. The flames slowly engulfed it, turning years of weight into ash. When the fire died down, all that remained was the sweet smell of burning wood and the feeling that, finally, everything was at peace. At the gate, Doña Celia was waiting for her. "Are you really leaving?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will. I think my time here is over." "And where are you going?" Elena smiled, looking at the horizon. "Where the past doesn't follow me." The two hugged, and Celia placed something in her hand, a small, weathered envelope. "I found this at the back of the church. It was for you." Her heart beat faster. "Teresa?" She looked around, trying to understand, but the street was empty. The wind blew, carrying a flower petal away. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the cold and heat mingling on her skin.
She put the letter in her pocket and smiled, a calm, knowing smile. She knew the past never completely disappeared, but now it no longer held her prisoner.
He took the first step out of the gate. The watch on his wrist marked a new time. And as the sun rose fully, Helena walked toward the road, leaving behind a house, a story, and a name, but taking with him that which no one could take away: the truth. Helena found her truth, but what about you? Sometimes what we need isn't answers, it's the courage to move forward. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel now. Here, every week, we experience new emotions, new truths, and discover that no family is perfect, but all pain can turn into strength.